So it is 3 o'clock, so I think we will begin. We'll wait until Wade gets back. Have your Bible open, please, at Philippians chapter 2 and verse 12. And you may recall from last week that Paul was urging the Christians at Philippi to have the same mind or the same outlook as Jesus had. And then he described Jesus' mind or outlook in verses 5 through 11. That though Jesus was God the Son, he emptied himself, became a human being, and died for our sins. And then Father exalted him or raised him to the highest place, that every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. We don't catch the nuance so much today, but the first readers would have seen the contrast between the claim in their day that Caesar is Lord. Caesar, the ruler of the Roman Empire, claimed to be the true Lord of that world. And Paul is saying, no, Jesus is the true Lord. But we can apply that today too, that Jesus is the true Lord. So Paul is going to continue to work out that thinking that we are to have the mind of Christ. So let's start with the first paragraph, verses 12 and 13. So Helen, if you wouldn't mind beginning.
13.
Verse 12.
Okay.
Chapter 2 and verse 12.
Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling.
Minchin, please.
For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose.
Okay. And we remember that Paul wrote in Greek. We are reading a translation, and the translation that was read is slightly different from mine. But that is the challenge of translation, isn't it? There are often several ways that one can convey the meaning from that language. For example, in verse 12, my translation says, therefore, my dear friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you may have loved ones. I looked at that recently in the Greek, and it simply says, it's the adjective for love. And it literally would be loved ones, literally.
Yeah.
But the translators here thought the best way of putting that sentiment was to translate dear friends, which I think gets at the idea very well. You see Paul's emotional connection with these Christians at Philippi. He has marked their life, they have marked his life, and he loves them. So his wish for them is that they would obey, even though he is not with them, that they would still obey even though he is absent. And we just began to look at this section last week, and I reminded you of what it's like when the teacher leaves the classroom. When the teacher is present, people behave. When the teacher is absent, sometimes they misbehave, don't they? But Paul says, don't do that. Obey, and this is what he wants them to obey. He wants them to work out their salvation with fear and trembling. And again, we looked at that briefly last week. It's not fear that paralyzes or that makes you want to run away from God, but rather a fear that is deep respect, very deep, profound respect. And trembling, we know what that is. And then we see in verse 13, for it is God who works in you, or is at work in you, God who is present in you, to will and to act according to his good purpose. So Paul is touching on a mystery. I'll put that word up here for you. Remembering that this letter, English letter Y, can be a vowel, or it can be a consonant. For example, in the word yellow, the Y is a consonant. It has a sound, y, yellow. But here it's functioning as a vowel, much like our I, like the letter I. So mystery, do you know the word mystery? Can you define the word mystery for me?
Secret.
Has to do with a secret, something unknown, something you would like to have explained, something you don't understand. There is a genre of literature, if you know this word, it's a French word actually, genre. There is a genre of literature called mysteries, a set of books that tell a story, and often there is a crime to be solved, and at the beginning of the book it's a mystery. Who murdered someone else? And the book will give you different characters that might be the murderer. And you try to, as the book unfolds, think through this, who you think is probably the murderer. That's mystery stories. We use the word in a broader way to talk about things that we simply do not understand. The love between a man and a woman is a mystery in many ways, isn't it?
Chemistry.
Chemistry is part of it. Personality. But there are many unknowns. Why does this person fall in love with that person? Isn't there an element of mystery, of the unknown in something like that? And I think in many ways children are a mystery. We know biologically how children come about, but sometimes when your child is born and they grow and develop their own personality, their own interests and so on, you might look at your child and say, who is this? Who is this little person that's now part of my life? It's so full of life, similar and yet so different from me as well. And there's mystery in so many parts of life. Well, there's mystery here in that Paul is saying, as you live as a Christian and grow as a Christian, you have a part. There are things you must do, but there are things you can count on God to do as well. So he says in verse 13, for God is at work in you, or works in you, both to will and to act according to his good purpose. God has a purpose for our life, and he is at work through his Spirit in our lives, but there are things that we must do. We must put into practice the things we know. For example, Paul has said, have the same mind as Jesus had, the mind of a servant. So our part is to do things that serve other people. But we can be assured that God will be at work in us to help us to be that servant. I'll tell you a brief story of an example in my own life of how God was at work. My first employment or job outside of my home was in a small town called Ponoka, Alberta. I was raised in Calgary, and I worked at what at that time was called an institution for mentally ill people. We don't use that term so much anymore, but people who cannot function on their own, who need oversight or supervision. And in those days they were housed in large institutions. And I was 19 years old, my first time away from home, and I was put on the infirmary ward. Infirmary, from the word infirm, people who are ill, who are physically ill, as well as having perhaps problems of functioning. They had physical problems. And I was an aide, an institutional attendant, I was called, an aide. And on this ward were many men who had various kinds of circulation problems that led to bed sores. Put that up. Wei will know what these are as a medical doctor. We call them bed sores. They can also be called pressure sores. And they come from lying in bed for too long in the same position, and where the skin begins to break down. And I encountered men who were in bed because they had problems with their legs, they couldn't walk, and other circulation problems. And I saw bed sores like this on the buttocks, the top back here, and on the hips. Some men had in all three locations. And these had to be treated every day, and the people turned. But once the bed sore was established, very difficult to get rid of it, very difficult. I was 19. I had never seen anything like this in my life. And I cared for these men. And these men were also incontinent. Incontinent, I think it's an E at the end, meaning they could not control their bladder anymore and the functioning of relieving the urine from the bladder. So we dressed them in pajamas, of all things. This was a long time ago. It was about 1969 or so, 1970, somewhere in that
No
area.
diaper?
What's that?
It's not diaper, right?
They weren't diapers. We did not use diapers, but today probably they would
Okay.
use adult diapers. And so my job was to, when I saw a puddle underneath one of these people, I would take them to a change room and remove their pajamas, clean them, put fresh ones on. And I helped to deal with the bed sores and so on. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, I was overwhelmed. I wanted to be anywhere but there in doing that job. I wanted so much to quit. Probably the main reason I didn't quit was because I couldn't face my father. My father raised me, you do not quit. If you begin a job, you finish it. I'm thankful for the training my father gave me. But after 2 or 3 weeks, a miracle happened. Somehow, and this is being a servant when you are changing the pajamas of grown men, older men who cannot control themselves anymore, and so on. You're doing the most basic care. But a miracle happened that at some point I began to see past the urine and the puddles and the things on the floor, and I began to move past the smells. I think it was the smells that were the hardest. Urine, the unit smelled so much of urine. But somehow I moved past that and I began to see men, individuals, human beings, people who had worth. Dignity. I didn't see simply men who wet themselves, but I began to see men made in the image of God, worth serving. And I cannot explain that. I did my part. I continued, even though it was difficult, to do my job, cleaning, changing, doing what I could to care for these men. But as I did my job, God did something in me. He opened my eyes and my heart to see people that were worth caring for and were worth using gentleness and kindness to. And I cannot explain it. It's a mystery. Got that? It's a mystery how that happened, but God worked in me that miracle. And so I came to enjoy my work. It's hard to explain how I could enjoy the work, but I did in time because I could see these men, and I found value in my work, that I was making a difference. Maybe in the eyes of the world I wasn't doing important work, but I think in the eyes of God I was, if you're understanding my story here. That was one of the most important experiences of my life, and helped shape me as a person, and helped me to learn to see beyond circumstances that people present to us, and to see the real person. Yes, David, go ahead.
That was when you were 19, right?
I was 19 years old.
Were you a Christian at that time?
I was.
Your dad was a pastor, right?
No, Marilyn's dad was a pastor. My father is not a Christian, not a follower of Jesus at all.
Must someone in military?
Father-in-law.
What's that?
Is someone in military or?
Not in my family.
Okay.
No. But my father he's still alive. He's 96.
Wow.
He lives in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island.
Nanaimo, I know
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
I went
have you been there?
I went there last summer.
Okay.
This summer, yeah.
This summer. And
Yeah,
then
this summer.
She told me where I should go to.
Oh, it's a very beautiful small city
Yeah.
on the eastern side of Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went there after her, 1 month after her.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
Yes.
去小人在那儿办，
不小
Wow.
他们在那儿，杨喜他们搬那里。
没办那儿，昨天都没来嘛。
So my point is that God was at work in me, helping me to have the mind of Christ. If I had quit, which I wanted to do after a few days, 1 week, God would not have been at work in me. I would have not have given him the opportunity to work in me. But my obedience created a space for God to work. And that's a lesson that I have learned to apply through all of life, that if we will persist in doing what is right, the correct thing, God will work in us to change our heart, to change our mind, to see differently. So, anything else in those two verses that you want to ask about or comment on? Well, let's go on then. Let's read the next paragraph from verse 14 through verse 18. I think it's Way's turn to read.
Do everything without complaining or arguing.
So that you may become blameless and poor,
Pure. Which means
Pure.
pure. Good.
children of God without fault in a corrupt,
Crooked. Oh, corrupt. I'm sorry, you had a different word there than I thought. I thought crooked, you have corrupt. We'll talk about those two words, so go ahead.
and
Generation.
depraved.
Depraved.
Deprived.
Depraved.
Depraved generation in which you shine like stars in the universe.
Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. As you.
Yeah, that sounded like the end of verse 15.
Verse 16. As you hold firmly to the word of life, and then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in vain.
But even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering and a sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with all of you.
Rejoice.
And then 18.
Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me.
Okay. We've got two different translations for a Greek word there. Corrupt. Does corrupt have two R's? Can't remember. Oh, I think not. And we've got a word depraved. I want to have contrast a word. Whoops. Deprive. Okay, we'll look at those two. The top two are two alternate translations of a Greek word. If something is crooked, it is not straight. My finger is straight, my finger is crooked. A path may be straight or a path may be crooked.
Yeah.
So corrupt, it has a number of meanings. A human being can be corrupt, which means they are not honest. They are not people of integrity, but rather will say one thing and do another, and often will act for their own benefit if they are corrupt. So we sometimes worry that politicians may be corrupt. They may find positions of power, but use that to enrich themselves. That can be a worry, that somebody who is corrupt. But we use it in another sense as the opposite of pure. If something is pure, it's whole, and it has only one essence. So we might talk about pure gold. So that would be gold.
That's real gold.
That would be real gold, and that would be without any mixture of other elements that make it less than just gold. We also talk about human beings who may be pure. It's not a common word we would use to describe a human being, but it would be somebody without fault, without sin, not corrupted by sin, but pure. Jesus had a pure heart.
Yeah.
I do not have a pure heart, though I want my heart to grow in purity. So corrupt would mean things have gone wrong. What was going straight has become crooked, has gone off.
But they know
the
what
path.
is right, right?
I think usually we do know what is right,
Okay.
and yet we choose a path that is not the straight path, but gets off somewhere. So Paul is describing here in that verse, that would be verse 15, he wants Christians to live differently from the rest of the world. To be blameless would be, no blame can be attached to you if you are blameless. You are faultless, without criticism, really, doing just what is right. And pure, the word pure also has the sense of good. So if someone has a pure heart, they have a good heart. They love people, they mean well, they care deeply to be pure. So Paul wants us to have that kind of heart, a pure heart. In the Sermon on the Mount, this is in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." That there's something about a childlike heart, an innocent heart, an uncorrupted heart that is able to see God and God at work in a way that the corrupt cannot see. Blessed are the pure in heart. So he wants us to be blameless and pure in heart, children of God without fault, in a crooked or corrupt and depraved generation. This word is different from deprive. To deprive means, and almost always we use the word deprive in relation to something, to a person. So I might deprive you of your parking spot. I would take it and put my car in there. So you no longer have your parking spot because I took it. I've deprived you of that. It means to take something away from someone. We sometimes talk about, not so much anymore, but in the past, deprived children. That would refer to children who don't have the normal advantages of life. Perhaps they're very poor, and they don't have access to books, or they may not have access to good food. We might call them generally deprived children. Those things do not belong to them. But that's different from what Paul is talking about. To be depraved means to give ourselves over to our lower nature and desires that are not good. So a depraved person may be greedy. They may be sexually irresponsible. They want sexual partners and sexual activity that are not healthy, not good. We would call that person a depraved person when we give ourselves over to our lower nature, our worst desires. And I think all human beings wrestle with our desires, don't we? And we want to follow and obey our higher nature, our better desires, not our worst desires. And then Paul says he wants us to shine like stars in the universe. As stars shine and give light, he wants us as Christians to shine. Now he's using that metaphorically. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that word to shine. It too has shades of meaning. That's the verb to shine. These lights are shining. The sun is shining in the sky. It means to give light. We also use it, though, metaphorically, that Rachel, David's daughter, may shine in school. You understand the meaning there? If she shines in school, it means she stands out and draws attention by her good work, by her excellent results. That is also to shine in that case. Or in athletics, if your son is playing soccer and scores 3 goals, we would say he shone. That would be the past tense of to shine. Shone. He shone. His star burned brightly. He was the star of the show. So, in Paul's sense here, if Christians shine, it means that they stand out in some way, in a very positive way. That other people actually see what we should be like, what all of us should be like, when we see that behavior, that's shining like a star. You can see God's light. Jesus once said, "I am the light of the world." And he meant several things by that, that you can see clearly what is good and true and right when you look at Jesus. He's the light of the world. You see more clearly by light, by something that is shining. So that's the idea there, that if Christians live well, they stand out in a positive way, and people see how we should live. And then he says in verse 16, as you hold out the word of life. Again, he's using it metaphorically. I'm holding out my glasses right now. I'm holding them out. That's literally to hold something. I'm holding them, and I'm holding them out. I'm putting them towards someone else. But metaphorically, it simply means offering that picture out there in the world. Holding forth the word of life. And by that he means the gospel. The good news that Jesus died for us, rose from the dead, and is the giver of life, the overcomer of death. We hold out that word by how we speak, but also by how we live. And if we shine, we hold out the word of life by action, as well as by words. And then he says, that I may boast on the day of Christ, that I did not run or labor for nothing, or one translation that was read was in vain. So let's look at, we looked at vain last week, but boast. And that word vain, to boast, a synonym would be to brag, to, this is an idiom that may help you to see what to boast means. An idiom would be to blow your own horn. It may seem like a strange idiom. To boast, to brag, means to talk about how great you are. How great I am. I did this. I got these marks in school. I was the fastest runner in my class. My achievements were... That is to boast. To talk about yourself and how wonderful you are. Also, we have a similar verb, to brag, means...
Or in the job interview, you have to do that.
You might say, though, that often it is insecure people who boast. That is, people who don't feel very confident, so they try to convince everyone else how wonderful they are.
Oh, that's Indian.
What's that?
All Indian people.
No? Maybe we shouldn't say that. I don't think that's true of all of anybody, but...
Don't tell me what to do.
But anyway, that's to boast or to brag. But the idiom is to blow your own horn. And the idea is, if somebody important comes along, there might be a welcome committee.
Yeah.
If the king arrives, and there are people on the sidelines blowing horns because someone important is here, and there's we call that a fanfare. Music, upbeat, wonderful music is played to announce the arrival of an important person. But if I'm bragging, I'm blowing my own horn to let people know that somebody important is here. That's the expression. So Paul, though, says he wants to boast, but he's not boasting in anything great about himself, but he's rejoicing, in a sense, in the Philippian Christians, who he hopes will be shining like bright stars, that will have the mind of Christ, will be serving and loving and suffering for Jesus. And Paul will say, those are my people. I'm so proud of those people. So he wants to boast. And in another letter, he says, may I never boast except in the cross, in what Jesus has done. That's who we should really boast about. And he says, on the day of Christ, that would be the day when Jesus returns to the earth. He wants to boast that I did not run or labor for nothing or in vain. So doing something for nothing means the same as doing it in vain. No results. For no results. That's what he means there. He hopes he has not run in vain. Paul has suffered, he's traveled, he's spoken to people about Jesus. He's been put in prison, he's been beaten, and he hopes all of that will not be for nothing. To have no results to show. That would be in vain. But I just wanted to mention, I thought about this after class last week when we talked about that in vain, that we have another meaning of it in English, and that is, I don't think I talked about this, to be vain. If somebody is vain, or maybe that was the meaning that we saw last week, to be vain means to think you're really something, and you pause and look in the mirror and admire yourself. That's a vain person who's preoccupied with their own looks or achievements and so on. Yeah, that was last week, and this is the slightly different meaning of in vain means to no effect or no fruit coming out of it. And then in verse 17, Paul says, even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I'm glad and rejoice. And he's making a bit of a mixed metaphor there. He lived in a world where sacrifices were common. Animal sacrifices. Animals were killed and the blood put on the altar, or the meat offered to the gods, so on. And often precious oil or ointments were poured out as an offering to the gods and so on. So that's the picture he has in his mind, that he, in a sense, if he should be put to death, remember he's in jail in Rome probably, and he may be executed, he likens his death to a sacrifice, that he is the sacrifice being poured out. And he says that it's, in a sense, connected with them on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith. That I think he's saying that he's okay with dying if it means they will be people of faith. He is willing to die in order for them to be people of faith. He's willing to do that. Thoughts or comments on the things that we have read in that paragraph? There's a lot in there. Or are there any other words you would like to talk about? We didn't talk about verse 14. I'll want to come back to that. But any other words in there that you want to ask about? Let's go back then to verse 14. Do everything without complaining or arguing.
Mine is grumbling.
Grumbling?
Grumbling.
What you have?
And disputing. Or
Grumbling
or
or
disputing.
arguing.
That normally I was.
Do everything without grumbling or arguing.
You always.
挺有自知之明的。
Do all things without grumbling, without complaining. We had arguing.
I will change. The beginning of the change. With this guy.
What were some of the other words that came out that you had in translation in verse 14?
Disputing.
Disputing.
Mm-hmm.
Complaining.
Okay, I've got that. There might have been something else as well, but and these are synonyms. There's slight differences, but to complain is to say something like, my food isn't hot enough. The service in this restaurant is too slow. It's to express unhappiness with the conditions you are experiencing and to articulate those to people. That is to complain. Some people quickly complain, others may be unhappy, but they will not say anything out loud. To grumble is very similar, but to grumble especially means to focus on what's wrong in my life and to be preoccupied with it and to be talking about it all the time. To grumble. So it's a way of complaining, but it's maybe a more powerful word. If somebody is grumbling, they're always talking about what's wrong. It's not pleasant to be around people who grumble. Sometimes you may take your child or children on vacation, and all they can do is talk about how unhappy they are. That it's too hot in the car, this trip is too long, it's taking too long, I can't get internet access to play my games.
Well,
I just don't like being here. They're grumbling. They're articulating all the things that are wrong. They are complaining. Arguing or disputing, it's very similar. It means entering into conflict with other people and trying to persuade them of your point of view and refusing to listen to their point of view, usually, when we're arguing. So, it wasn't often, but sometimes my children would argue. No, you did that. No, it's my turn. No, and so on. They're arguing. And then they'll say, Mom, she's or he's doing this, and they're arguing or disputing. It's interesting, Paul has just said, have the same mind as Jesus had. And the opposite of that would be to be grumbling, complaining all the time, disputing and arguing. These are unpleasant social interactions when people are grumbling. I'll show you one other thing before we move on from here.
For the debate, does it include two meanings? One is argue, one is discuss.
Well, debate is different.
It only discuss, no argue.
Oh, debate is different. Debate is very formal and friendly. Debate is different. I think.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. A debate, if it's well done, is not an argument, and people are not grumbling. In a debate, you are seeking truth.
Yeah.
And so one part in the debate is asked to defend yes to a proposition, the other to no to the proposition. For example, there is a God might be the proposition. One person is asked to say yes and give evidence, the other no and give evidence. And if it's well done, they are polite, they listen to one another, they present arguments, and truth begins to emerge in a good debate or in a good discussion.
Okay.
It doesn't get personal.
Okay.
We don't insult the other person. And we listen and so on.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, but I want to come to this question. Is the cup half full or half empty? If you picture a glass of water, and it's at the halfway mark. Is the cup half full,
Half full.
or is it half empty?
No, half full.
We use that as an expression to describe two types of people. There are half full people, and there are half empty people. Meaning, some people see the positive. The cup's half full. That's good. I still have half the cup. And the others who are negative people or pessimistic, the cup's half empty. So they see the dark side of life. People who are half empty people tend to see problems, tend to see what's wrong and focus on that. Others are more optimistic or positive, and they see what's right, what's good. Paul is asking us not to be half empty people, to be grumbling, to complaining, to point out what's wrong, but rather to be positive people, to notice what's
Yes.
right.
I know who you are thinking about now.
No, he talked about. We talked about it just now.
Okay.
After the
That's half full.
就你
It makes a great deal of difference.
Yeah, I was debating now.
In the culture of a group, or the feeling of a group, whether people are positive or negative.
negative.
If the group has a negative culture, it tends to pull you down and
always
suck
complaining.
the life out of it. So
Yeah.
Paul says Christians should not be like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my wife and I are always challenging each other on this, because sometimes we're walking and we begin to focus on the negative. So one of us will catch it. No, just let's stop right here. We're becoming grumblers, and Paul says, don't be like that.
Yeah.
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 Well, you can't do that in construction though. But you see, everything's half full, then you collapse.
I suppose. Yeah, if you're constructing a building or something, you need to be complete.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's an expression that you may hear sometimes. The cup's half full, the cup's half empty. What kind of person are you? But anyway, let's see, I think we have time just to go a little bit farther. Let's read the next paragraph from verse 19 through 24. I think it's Chin's turn to read.
I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you.
I have no one else like him who takes genuine interest,
Genuine.
genuine interest
Good.
in your welfare.
For everyone looks out for his own interests, not those of Jesus Christ.
Good.
But you know that
Timothy
has proved himself because as a son with his father, the Savior served with me in the word of the gospel.
Good.
I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me.
And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon.
Okay, lots in there. The word Timothy, our friend Tim has chosen that as his Canadian name. Tim, who usually comes here, who has the honey business.
Tim.
Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, Tim.
From
So
Timothy.
Tim is short for Timothy.
Oh.
That's the full name. And
John
often
is short for Johnny, right? Johnny.
No, actually, John is the full name,
Oh.
and Johnny is what we call a diminutive.
Oh.
I'll show you with my name. My name actually is this. Ronald.
Ronald.
Oh, no,
But
no.
the short form is Ron. That's what most people call me.
Yeah.
My mother called me
Ronnie.
Ronnie.
Okay.
So that's what we call the diminutive. It's a way of expressing affection for someone. Anyway, and so Johnny would be like that. The full name is John, but Johnny would be a way that a mother would address their child. So nobody calls me Ronnie. My mother is no longer alive, but she was the only one that would call me.
I was wrong for the whole time. I thought the ending word with IE means female or something.
No, it's not a feminine meaning.
Okay,
It's just it can be for many.
In China, Ronnie
And
always
sometimes
used by the ladies.
sometimes that's expressed with IE, sometimes with Y. So here's your name,
爱称
David.
什么名啊？爱称。
That's the full name, David. That's the full name, Dave. The shortened
Dave.
version is Dave,
Yeah.
and the diminutive would be Davy.
Davy. Oh, yeah.
Little Davy.
Baby,
Like when child is small, it'll often be called Davy.
Oh, okay. 还有点
Yes,
意思。
yeah.
Anyway, so Timothy is a young man that Paul chose as a companion and to train, to teach. I'll put a couple other words up here for you. So a mentor is someone who is a teacher, but more than a teacher. You have a personal relationship with a mentor, and the person being trained is the mentee. So often in skilled trades, a master carpenter will teach a younger person skills. And will watch their work and correct their work and encourage. And the mentee will look up to the mentor. They will admire them, want to be like them. That's a mentor. So Paul was a mentor to Timothy. He was training him to take his place. So we have this expression, to pass the torch. To pass the torch. In the Olympic Games, often there is a run, what we call a relay, where the Olympic torch, which is burning, will arrive eventually at the stadium, the main stadium where the Olympic Games are held, and different runners will carry the torch and will pass it to the next runner, who will then take it to the next runner until it finally arrives at a destination. This is an idiom in English. When I retired from being pastor here, I passed the torch to Ryan, to Pastor Ryan, who became the pastor. If Ryan is wise, he will be looking at younger men coming behind that he will want to pour his life into. One day he will pass the torch to them. And that's true of all of us. We should always be thinking about how we can help train or teach those coming behind us and pass on our skills. And in Paul's case, it's his love for Jesus and his ministry, bringing the good news of Jesus to other people. So Paul trained Timothy. And he says wonderful things about him. He says, I hope to send Timothy to you soon. It won't be right away, though. He says at the end of that paragraph, I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. In other words, he's waiting for a second trial or hearing that will determine whether he will be executed or set free or kept in prison. As soon as he knows, he will send Timothy to Philippi to tell them how things are. Okay? And then he says, I have no one else like him. I have no one else like Timothy. And then he explains, who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. Welfare means more than one thing in English.
I will change my name to Timothy.
It's a good name. But David is a good name too, a very biblical name. Welfare, the general meaning is well-being. How are you faring? How are you doing? That is your welfare. But we use it more specifically today to mean handouts to the poor. So some people are on welfare, we say, or social assistance. That is, the government provides some food and clothing and money for them for rent and things. But here it's the general meaning. Paul says, I have no one like Timothy who will be genuinely interested, truly from the heart interested in how you are doing, and that you do well, and will help you to do well if you are not doing well. That's being interested in your welfare. I'm very interested in the welfare of my granddaughters. I have 4 granddaughters here in Regina, and how they are doing matters greatly to me. And so if things are not going well, I will do all I can to help get them back on track. That's Timothy, though. Paul says, I have no one like him who will care that way for you. And I hope to send him to you soon. And then he says, for everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. So it's very sad. He has other Christians around him, but he looks and he says, I really only have Timothy that I can count on to be like Jesus and to care for you. Others may be too busy. I would like to help, but sorry, I've got this and I've got that and the other thing to do, so no, I can't go. I can't go to Philippi. I'm too busy. I have my own interests. So it's kind of sad, especially when Paul has just talked about having the mind of Christ, the mind of a servant. He says too many of them just care about their own interests. But Timothy has proved himself. Finish up quickly here, but
So your camera is not wide enough?
to prove oneself. We use the word prove to demonstrate proofs. That is, to demonstrate the truth of something. So there are mathematical proofs, and there are probably proofs in physics as well, and so on, to establish the truth of something. But to prove oneself is to demonstrate one's capability and reliability. So if your professor gives you an assignment, you prove yourself by doing the assignment well. And he looks and says, yep, I can count on you. You know what you are doing. Paul says Timothy has proved himself. So he has seen evidence in Timothy's life that he can count on him. That's what he is meaning. So
Well, Timothy was his secretary, right?
well, he never calls him a secretary. He calls him more his co-worker.
Co-worker.
But he is a younger co-worker that doesn't carry all the responsibilities that Paul does. But in time, Paul gave him more and more responsibility. He left him in charge of churches and things. He sent him on missions where he would go and do something on Paul's behalf. And he proved himself. Those are words we want to hear from those we respect that Ron has proved himself. I'm happy with his work. Those are wonderful words to hear. Anything else in that paragraph? We'll finish there, but anything else in that paragraph? Any words you want to talk about? Meaning or pronunciation? Genuine.
Yeah,
Talk about that.
Yeah.
Genuine. Emphasis on the first syllable. Genuine. It means authentic, true, not phony, not fake, but genuine. When you're buying things online, you wonder, say you're buying a special wristwatch, and you see it online and you wonder, is it genuine or is it fake? Is it a knockoff? That's a word maybe you don't know, an expression.
Knockoff.
Is it a knockoff? That means that it looks like the real thing, but it's not. It's copying the real thing. That's the idea of knockoff. But it's not real. What's that?
Is it replica or is it
Oh, replica.
replica?
Yeah, replica is a more positive word.
Oh, okay.
Replica. It's a good word. The difference, though, is that with a replica, you are trying to copy something, but you are not trying to fool people.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
You're trying to create something that used to be, that maybe doesn't even exist anymore, or exists somewhere else. For example, the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Somebody might build a replica here,
Okay.
or like the tabernacle that Abraham has done. That's a replica of the real thing. But Abraham's not trying to say this is the real tabernacle. But with a knockoff or with a fake, you're trying to fool people
Oh, okay.
to pay good money, big money, for something that's not genuine.
Okay.
We also use the word genuine to mean sincere. It can be a synonym for sincere. When I express my love for my wife, I'm genuine in that expression. It's true, it's real. I'm not just faking it, pretending. We use it in that sense as well. So he takes a genuine interest. That means a true interest, a real interest, not a fake interest. Genuine. Okay, we'll stop for today and pick it up with verse 25 then next week.
Thank you, Pastor Ron.
Oh, you're very welcome, Wei, as always. My pleasure. I hope always that you learn more English, but also that you learn the faith better and better too. That's my real heart's desire.